Again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Workshop A3. My name is Miguel Carlin. I'm your APSI co-host for today. Just some reminders. We encourage you to please mute yourself if at all possible, so that we're able to start the workshop on time and not have any background or echo noises. For those that need the subtitles, we certainly welcome you to use that feature on Zoom. For those that would like to minimize that feature, you will want to hit more on if you're on a desktop, it's got 3 little dots. Click that and then hit hide subtitle and it should disappear for you. We are recording today's session, so you will be able to get that information after we have concluded. We also invite folks to put information in the chat window. Questions or comments, and we will be monitoring that throughout the session. If you have any technical issues or problems, you can chat me directly if you know how to do that, and I can get you the telephone number. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Brian Ellison to begin our workshop today. Reverend Ellison.
Thanks so much, Miguel. It is really good to be with you all. I am still looking for a couple of our panelists. So I'm going to invite my colleague, Susan Thornton, to keep an eye out for them and help me identify them as they arrive and get them spotlighted so everyone can see them.
I will do that, and I did just email them as well. So
excellent. Well, we can certainly get started in any case. So welcome everybody to this workshop. It's the first in a series planned by the APSI Diversity Task Force for this year's event. The title is Having Difficult Conversations, and the presenting topic that we'll take as the basis for that exploration today is conversations about race. We hope you'll also consider joining us tomorrow for workshop B3, which is making difficult decisions, where we talk about the decisions faced by LGBTQIA+ people and the churches and communities they're part of. And also on Saturday for workshop C3, Taking Action, where we talk about economic justice and how we move from difficult conversations and decisions to difficult actions. My name is Brian Ellison. I'm Executive Director of the Covenant Network of Presbyterians, which is a group that has long been about helping the church have difficult conversations, in our case, primarily about LGBTQ inclusion in the church. One good place to start in navigating difficult conversations, though, is acknowledging when you're not an expert on the topic. And I am not the expert on today's topic. Our panelists, lucky for you, are, both by their study and their lived experience. And so toward the end of our workshop, we will turn to Christian educator Susan Thornton, who will close us with a few minutes of practical teaching and connecting us with resources to continue this work beyond the workshop. But first, we're going to turn to our panel. And I will let them take up even more of the screen. All right, so I will introduce each of our panelists by asking them a question, and I'll start with the Reverend Cruz. He is Associate Pastor at Westminster Presbyterian Church in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Chris.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
So, Chris, you have been engaged, whether you wanted to be or not, for better or for worse, in difficult conversations about race for your entire life. I wonder if you would talk about how your willingness to engage in that conversation has evolved from your growing up in the Jersey suburbs to your ministry today as a pastor.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for inviting me to talk about this, and it's this great conversation. I'm glad. I love APSI, by the way. I've been to a bunch of APSIs, and yeah, I'm very glad that this is happening. So I get the idea of not wanting to talk about race. I actually really do, because I didn't want to talk about race my entire life. I grew up in the Jersey suburbs. I have 2 parents who are immigrants from the Philippines. I'm a citizen here, and from the beginning, as a kid, I just wanted to fit in. I was in a mostly white suburb. And so the way I absorbed that as a young person is, well, if I just fit in with the white folks, then everything will be, handy dandy and great. Just don't talk about race. Don't try to be different. So I wanted to assimilate. And so, I think part of that was, I remember when my dad, I was like in 3rd grade, and my dad was told, like, go back to your third world country. And as a kid, I was just like, wow, you get really hurt if you are different. And I couldn't absorb all the white supremacy that was above that. And I remember boys in 8th grade, like a boy like just whispered to me, why is there an African American club or an Asian American club? Why can't there be a white club? And I was just supposed to nod my head, because if I didn't, if I talked about race, then I wouldn't, then the gig would be up. It's interesting because white people would talk about race to me all the time, but I wasn't allowed to talk about myself. Kids would be like, oh, that kid probably just got that position because he's Black. Or, if you're brown, you get to Harvard so much easier. And I remember coming to faith in a white church. So I was an atheist for a little bit, and that's a different story. But I came back to faith in a white church, and like the head pastor, who was very charismatic white guy in a mostly white church, would talk about a young Black boy that he worked with, and start just talking in this accent that was very racist. And everyone would laugh, and I would just sit there in this kind of crowd, just not being able to deal with this, So I decided as an adult that I had to change, and and that I think the moment for me was when the Black Lives Matter movement was happening, and I was getting really angry, and none of those white folks that I tried my whole life to assimilate with cared about it. And it was like, why did I do all of this assimilating for if we're not in this together when it mattered? And so since then, I've been trying to be very intentional as a leader, as a pastor, as a father and a person, to talk about race. I was part of a church prior to Westminster where it was a mostly Black immigrant church, First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica, church I love. And I will never forget, we had an organizing event where we basically heard one after the other stories of mostly young Black men and their dealings with police. And, it was just like, no, you can't deny this, right? Mm-hmm. And now I'm at Westminster Presbyterian Church, a mostly white progressive church, but they're a church who has a racial justice group and all that. And, I think my basic kind of answer to your question, we have to talk about race, because no matter how much I tried to stop talking about race, every time I looked in the mirror, there was a brown person there. And so if you have the privilege to be able to not do it, you should do it on behalf of everybody.
Thanks, Chris. That's a great place for us to start today's conversation, and I really appreciate it. Let me turn to my friend and colleague, the Reverend Laura Mariko Heifetz. She's Assistant Dean at Vanderbilt Divinity School. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
It's nice to see you. You two have talked about the ways that speaking about race has taken different forms through different sort of seasons, different developmental phases of your life. I wonder, what have you found made those conversations productive or didn't, whether through your young adulthood and now in your, somewhat less young adulthood?
I think I'm just a regular adult now.
Yes, me too.
Great. Thanks. I think when I first started speaking to people really outside of my family, I actually remember doing it in high school. And there was a teacher that I had who said she didn't see me as Asian. And I was like, but I am. So I gave her a book to read. She appreciated it. We're still in touch today. She's great. But I think because my family is not very shy, at least internally, I'm biracial. My mom is 3rd and 4th generation Japanese American. My dad is 3rd generation white Jewish. And so we talked about race and culture and sex and politics and religion, because I'm a double PK too. And that was very normal. So it was weird, first of all, to be told when I left the house that we were different, and that those were things we don't talk about. That was just very unfamiliar. Like, we do all the biracial family jokes internally. And so the fact that other people were like, was just very strange to me. And they thought I was the strange one. So I think when I first started really talking about it, at least within the church context, I think I was 20 or so. And because I had grown up in predominantly white churches, I knew that these were people who believed they were good people and that we had really fairly healthy individual relationships. But there was this funny block that would come about in that I was speaking both facts because I had lots of facts, but also just from this deep sense of knowing the worth and humanity of different people of color because we had family and friends, and also knowing that there are structural things at play, and trying to convince people. I think sometimes I took advantage of the relationships because I was pretty harsh, and maybe it's because maybe all 21, 22-year-olds are fairly straightforward. And I think sometimes I also did not worry if we didn't really know each other too much. I would just say it anyway. And I really believed that my capacity to say these things to people could pull us through and create change. And I definitely now know I'm more realistic, I think, now, that it's not totally about changing hearts and minds, regardless of how that, whether or not people change their hearts and their minds. It's really more about the structural change we're able to make at a policy level in a lot of ways, and a capacity for a theological transformation to let go of our white supremacist theology. Sometimes I get very impatient that people require an actual biblical reason to oppose white supremacy because I think it's so obvious. But it's clearly not obvious that we need something much more than that. So I think I really appreciate all of my elders who have been patient with me, who've been doing this work way longer than I have. And I think I take a lot of lessons about longevity and about being accountable to people instead of just exploding a conversation.
Thanks, Laura. I think that that's an interesting piece that I think we may want to explore further, is where is that line between directness as positive and important and directness as a barrier to perhaps to some and not others. Let me invite another member of our panel next. The Reverend Dr. Michael Edwards is Executive Minister in the Regional Synod of New York in the Reformed Church in America. Dr. Edwards, welcome to you.
Welcome to all of you.
Glad you're here. So when we spoke last week, Michael, you told me that communication is key to understanding. Why do you think that is? What really is the payoff to engaging in the difficult conversation? And Laura touched on this a little bit. What do you think is gained, particularly, I might ask you, for a white person engaging with a person of color, or some other person in a position of privilege engaging with someone who is part of a group that has experienced oppression or exclusion or discrimination? Why is that conversation important for them?
Well, for me, my grandparents and my parents always been direct and always said to us to communicate and to share our feelings, our attitudes, and whatever sometimes cause us some difficulties in our lives. When it comes to race relations, I have always been in the area of confronting folks to be direct. Direct in their language, direct in how they approach me as an African-American person, and also to be specific in their language, because sometimes it's not acceptable for African-American to be knowledgeable on certain issues, certain activities, and so forth. And I'm thankful to God for being able to be educated in an educated situation, that I can have these conversations with people and not feel threatened because I'm an African American. On the other hand, I noticed some of my white colleagues have always been surprised at the way I dress in a suit and tie, and question the validity of that. To say, well, I see other African Americans, they casual, why you have a suit and tie? And communication speaks a lot, because I would like, as a high school principal, for all of my students to know that there's a dress code. There's a way in which you go and communicate at interviews and how you speak to the general public. And so communication is a key to understanding who I am and who you are. And as the brother earlier mentioned, sometimes we feel ashamed, we be isolated, but at the same time, if someone's going to step on my toe, I'm going to say, ouch, and not hold it in. And I think so often people do not communicate and embed all of these feelings and turn those feelings into negative behavioral actions. And so as an African American, I feel I have a right to communicate within and be respectful to other folks. And I think that's another key point. Communication demands respect, whoever you are.
Amen. Well, thank you. We hope that we are joined here by one additional panelist, the Elder Fern Cloud, who is Stated Clerk of Dakota Presbytery, and I hope that she is able to join us before we are done. Also want to invite all of you to be part of this conversation through your questions, and I'm going to invite you to put your questions in the chat. We'll get to those in just a little while. I'll try to go through those as time permits, but feel free to put those in the chat. You can address them directly to me, Brian Ellison, in the chat, or you can put, if you don't mind, you can put them so everyone can see them. It's up to you. All right, so let me ask each of you. I mean, one of the things that I found most meaningful in our conversation are the personal experiences that each of you has had having difficult conversations about race, and in a variety of contexts. And I wonder if you'd be willing to share a time when you found yourself engaged in a difficult conversation, whether it went well or didn't go well, and why. As you look back on it, what were the key elements of what was successful or unsuccessful about it?
Well, Brian, one of the situations I faced is when I did some mission work in Iowa, and I wanted to know how farmers live and how farmers work on a farm. And I stayed with a family, and the children on that first day said to me, "Do not go with my father. Do not wake up early. Do not be there at 4 o'clock feeding the pigs and the cows and all of that." And they were very vocal, and so, but I was curious. I wanted to know how what happens at a farm, and so I went and took a shower that early morning, like 3:30, and have my Sunday clothes ready. Went out to the farm, fed the pigs, walked, did the cows, did the chicken, and all of that, and then went to service. And after service, they took me to the airport, and I went to the I was Northwest Airlines, and people were just staying their distance from me, not realizing I smelled. And someone asked, "Were you around pigs?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, you smell like a pig." And not realizing, if I had listened to the kids, then I would realize what they were saying and how the cultural life makes a difference. And as an urban person, young man, I wanted to experience what it was like to be a farmer. And I truly experienced that communication also has to depend on listening.
An important lesson for sure. I'm going to interrupt my own question to everybody, which was to share a time where you had a difficult conversation on race, to introduce our fourth panelist who, with some technical problems, has persevered, and I'm grateful. Elder Fern Cloud, Stated Clerk of Dakota Presbytery. Welcome, Fern. I'm glad you made it. I wanted to ask you, you have spent much of your life serving in the church. You have worked in Native ministry contexts. You've worked at the national level of the church. You've talked about racism and colonialism and the church's history. You've said that one of the things you told me is that you've had to learn to navigate through it. What are the tools that you've applied for that navigation in such an environment? How do you find your way when the going is so difficult? And I'll invite you to unmute yourself and then share with us.
Greetings. It's good to be here this noon. I'm on Central Time. Yes, I actually came into Dakota Presbytery in 2004 as a CRE. And I've been pastoring the same church here in Granite Falls, Minnesota. ZZ Presbyterian Church is on a small Dakota community in West Central Minnesota. Being in Dakota Presbytery, if you don't know, it is a Native American presbytery made up of all Native ministers. And I think when I came in, it was difficult, you know, being a woman, for one thing. You know, in our culture, it's always been the men who were the you know, primarily the spiritual leaders, I guess. And so, you know, even given that, I knew God called me, and I think that has been my driving force, that I knew that God called me to this, you know, to this ministry. And so that has been my driving force, I guess. You know, if God be for me, who can be against me, so to speak. So, you know, I started out being, you know, working with the Synod of Lakes and Prairies as a commissioner for Dakota Presbytery. And, you know, at that time, there was a big disconnect between Dakota Presbytery and the Synod because of racism. Many of the older ministries who had more experience, I guess, were just really disillusioned. And, you know, they had a lot of, you know, negative experiences and feelings. And they appointed me as commissioner, and I went and, you know, and I found that to be true. I was treated badly as, you know, oh my goodness. So, I mean, just thinking back on that, I just stayed. I continued on because, you know, all in all, I mean, bottom line is we need to build bridges. We need to repair, you know, that gap between the cultures and racism. And I think that has really helped me, you know, that my vision and my attitude towards racism, although it's there. I mean, yes, I know it's there, and I don't dismiss it. I'm just saying that in my life, I've always tried to be an overcomer and really express the gospel message in my own life, you know. And I think a lot of times in those arenas of you know, the structure, I think a lot of people forget, and I think that was a main thing that disillusioned many of the Native ministers is that the lack of their colleagues there that that fail to express the gospel message as far as being inclusive and loving and and all that. So yeah, I was commissioner to Synod for 4 years, and I was a moderator of the Synod of Lakes and Prairies. And yeah, so my presbytery continued to see that that I had a good attitude and that I was doing good work. So I was appointed to all of the General Assemblies since 2004. So this is. I didn't know. I didn't know a thing about presbytery, especially on that level. The higher up, Synod, GA, and so I learned by experience. Nobody mentored me. Nobody said this is what's going on, and it seems like I had to just learn learn that Presbyterian structure just by experience. And it took a long time as I got involved and I began to see that all in all on that General Assembly level there was really just a little inkling of Native presence. And so I really felt like, we need as First Nations people, as, of this, and our relationship with the Presbyterian Church going back to the 1800s, I felt like, we really need a stronger representation. And, all in all, over the years, I with that, people seeing my desire to make those changes. I was, involved in a Native American Consulting Committee, and eventually over the years, I became the moderator and got more involved with, with those issues, with the overtures, with the doctrine of discovery, which I think is really important to understand. It tells a lot about our history and of Native people. And I think the church needs to realize that the doctrine of discovery had led to a lot of trauma, and a lot of was pretty much the foundation for genocide and many other horrific policies that the government and the church, mandated on our people. So it's been a struggle, but the work continues on. And I thank you for your question. I just don't want to ramble, so I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
I appreciate it very much, Fern. And I think one of the realities about our topic of difficult conversations is that everyone's experience and situation is different, and there isn't a formula for how you have a difficult conversation. It all depends on what we have experienced and what we've endured and what we're dealing with and what we need to learn. And so I'm grateful for each of you sharing your stories, even as they take us in a variety of directions. I know people will find points of connection in all of them. Let me turn back to that question I asked about personal experiences you've had having difficult conversations about race, and if there are good examples of it going well or not going well, and what contributed to that. I don't know if Chris or Laura, if you had answers to that.
I can go. And I'm conscious of I'm sure you'll ask these when I'm looking at the chat, some of the questions that are being asked.
And there are great questions. We're going to get to those very shortly.
Yeah.
So.
What I'll say and what I'm sensing, and just, so I'm someone who's had experience being in a lot of white spaces. And I know that most of the folks on this call may or may not be in mostly white churches, maybe in different parts of the country. So I'm seeing questions like the race card and all that. So the experience I'll share that's relevant is that I took when I was at First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica, Queens, a mostly Black immigrant church, we took a youth minister, mostly Black youth, over to Iowa, actually, Dr. Reverend. So when you said that, you know, the Iowa connection, and it was a partnership with youth from Iowa and youth from New York City. And the youth from Iowa had this idea: let's go on a scavenger hunt where we run around neighborhoods to different congregants' homes in the Iowa church and knock on the doors, you know, and like try to find things throughout the neighborhood. And immediately the Black youth minister, like, and this was like 3 years ago or maybe, and immediately picked up, no, we can't do that. And so I remember being in sort of like a table, and you have the white Iowan leaders, adults, and then the adults from First Presbyterian Church in Jamaica, mostly Black. And what you had was kind of white denial, like, oh no, it wouldn't be bad. And at first, like, the Black folks didn't really know how to like bring it up. I you know, not being Black or white, I had to like bring up, well, the issue is the you know, the fear of harm for the Black youth. And so, you know, and then like it was like this awkward conversation where the white folks were like, oh no, everyone here is so nice, and the Black folks having to be like, well, you know, we just, our experience has been, if Black youth are running around white neighborhoods, it's not going to look great. And I guess what I would leave from that conversation in relation to some of these other questions about, you know, how do I bring out race to folks who are going to say it's, you know, this or that. One of the greatest tools of white supremacy is the way we talk, and specifically that culture of silence, of not talking about it. You will always get pushback, and you just have to make a decision as to whether, in what places are you going to break the bubble that is the tool of white supremacy. So I'm not saying you just like, you know, be overly rash over the time, but like it will always be breaking a status quo, and you just have to just decide whether it's important for you not to break it.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Anyone else on that topic, or should Laura?
This actually, I think, bounces off a little bit of what Chris was talking about, being Asian American. So as a person of color, I worked in a place that had, at some point, it was basically like Black and white leadership fairly evenly split. But I would hear, as a person of color, the Black staff members talk about, oh, I really don't want to do this, like this Christmas party every year is dumb. We go to the board chair's house and she's rich and white and she always has, she hires Black caterers to do the food and it's very uncomfortable for us. But they had never told the leadership, I think. And there was a new leader that came in, an interim, a white woman. And I think I must have said something to her, but she asked me a couple of questions. So I basically was like, okay, I will do the labor for this. Rather than making someone like these Black folks who are more vulnerable, I was new, so I could get away with a lot, explain it. So I did a little primer for her. And then she asked me in an executive staff meeting if I could say why that might be an uncomfortable situation for folks, and maybe why that's not the best tradition to keep going. And so it was very weird for me because I really don't like speaking on behalf of other people. I think that they are able to speak on behalf of themselves. But given that it had been years and years of silence on their part when it came to talking with their white colleagues about this, I was like, fine. So it was awkward, but I just said, you know, there's a lot of history between Black people and white people. I felt like an idiot saying it like this. And this is why folks are finding it problematic. And maybe it'd be nice to do something that didn't have maybe these like power dynamics, but might give the staff a place to be themselves. And it was not perfect, but one of the executives who was Black pulled me aside afterwards and was like, thank you for saying something. I think it just been such a long standing pattern. And there are only a few opportunities in life where we get the opportunity to break patterns like that. So even though I could tell some people were like, oh, that's too bad, I always liked it. They dealt with it, and other people who might have been uncomfortable that I was kind of sharing a little bit of business from behind the scenes, they dealt with it, and there's a new tradition created. So I think a lot depends on leadership capacity to hear, and people's curiosity that even if they don't understand right away, to be like, okay, I'll figure it out, I'll deal.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. We have about 10 or 12 minutes before we turn to the teaching time, and I do see a bunch of really great questions from the workshop participants here. So let me put a couple of those to the panel, and you can unmute yourselves, panel, as you wish, and jump in for these. I appreciated this question from Christina. How do I talk about race without being, quote, overly political? And particularly as youth and parents might see that. Christina's especially interested in talking about how to have a conversation with youth on these topics. But what about that threat of your conversation being too political? Anyone want to jump in, Laura?
It's going to be political because political means how we arrange our lives together. Like, what are our shared agreements as a congregation or as a community or as a country? So I think, however, I do understand the question. And I have found I'm not always the best person for these conversations because, again, I don't find politics uncomfortable. But being able to think about, I think with kids, it can be a little bit easier sometimes to talk about the goodness in folks' history and how potentially bringing in some other voices and sharing poetry and literature. There are other ways to think about race without it always being about inequality, because we who are racialized people, we like who we are. We're proud of who we are, and we have a lot to share. That's not just about how white supremacy is keeping us down. So that is one way to kind of come at it from the underside.
And sometimes even the perception that comes from white folks, you're too political. It's a way of avoiding the race issue. And especially as we take leadership position in the church, it becomes a avoidance and acceptance. And when I listen to Fern, her experience, and I can relate to it being an executive minister in a region in the Reformed Church in America, it becomes more self-taught, a way in which we excel in our work because of the grace of God. And so when we excel, we know, even though there's a lot of hindrance and people who will try to find fault with our leadership, they become also political enemies because who we are doing successful and being successful. So when I heard Laura talks about how she confronted a situation and how the executive said, oh, I thank you for sharing that with us, but why you couldn't think of it yourself?
Another question that someone asks is, how do you respond? Meredith asked this question. How do you respond to people saying that racism is over or urging you to stop playing, quote, the race card? I think there may be a lot of folks on this call who can't believe that that is still said in conversations. There probably are people on this call who are all too familiar with that being said. It is said. What do you do with that? Fern?
Brian, we hear that all the time. People always say, just get over it. When we're talking about, the racism, the institutional racism, just racism in general, and how that has affected us as a people. I've heard so many times, just get over it. it's easy to say, but when someone doesn't understand the effects of the trauma over the centuries, you know, a lot of people don't understand that Native American people have dealt with racism for the last 500 years. You know, how do we deal with it? It's still, you know, here today. But so over the years, what we have done is, you know, we have just really tried to heal our own people, you know, because racism is, as long as people are ignorant of history and fail to, you know, really reach out to people of color, racism will be here. So we have just, you know, taken the steps to heal ourselves, to teach our own children the correct history, and, you know, to number one, our culture. Our culture is very important to us, and our cultural ways are very inclusive. And this is what a lot of people don't understand about Native people is when, you know, when in 1492, when they came, they failed to say, what are your beliefs? And because our beliefs were very biblical. You know, we believe in one, we are monotheistic. We don't believe in a bunch of gods. We have one God, and that is the creator of all things, that is wonderful and good. And so, you know, it's like we can see racism, we can see it, we can identify it, in all of this, but we can't fix it. We're not racist. Indigenous people are not racist. If we were racist, you know, it's against it's against our beliefs, I think, as a whole. So that's a tough question. You know, you know, as Native people, we have different answers.
Anyone else on the accusation that you're playing the race card when you want to have a conversation about race? Chris, you mentioned the race card in one of your earlier answers. I don't know if you wanted to touch more on that.
Well, sure. Well, I guess there are two things I want to kind of mention in relation. One very practical resource that may or may not be helpful for folks. The New York Times published an essay a few days ago by a psychologist called The Science of Reasoning with Unreasonable People. And one of the points of that article, and I'll put it in the chat, was kind of, you know, that basically, like, you have to find their motivation to change rather than trying to change their mind. I'm not sure if I agree with everything with the article, but you can read it for yourself. But I think the more basic point is that I think arguments can only go so far. I think it's important to argue facts and things like that, but I think hearing people out and then trying to work with that, like generally on an individual level, is probably your best bet on a long term, especially those as leaders. But then on the other hand, and I guess in terms of the race card and like how to deal with that and how to frame that in your mind, because I see a comment here that says racism is about humanity and not politics, and the question comes from a misunderstanding of people whom racism is afflicted on. I would I appreciate what you're trying to say, that I think people don't understand and are not respecting folks' full humanity, but I would push back a little bit, because I actually do think that racism ultimately is about politics. And I think we would have more honest conversations if we just like actually say, you know, the reason it's hard because it is about politics. And specifically, and I'll be brief, like the most of the racial biases we have come from the self-interest of whatever we needed to, the people in power needed to get out of it, right? So Native Americans had to be savages, in quote unquote, in order to steal their land. Like Black folks had to be, less than or criminals in order to shove them in prisons and enslave them in order to get the wealth. And so I guess I would just say, like, internally, like you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable truth, which is like racism is about politics and about power and about structures.
And to that end, let me see if I can ask one last question before we turn to the educational piece of this workshop. Well, it's all educational. This is the teaching piece. We touched, it was actually, I think, in Laura's very first answer on this idea that you only go so far with changing hearts and minds. And I think, Chris, your comment about you can only win arguments with people if they want their mind to be changed. And I found that too in the LGBTQ work I've done. Like you build relationships, and that sometimes brings about change of hearts and minds, but not really arguments. But changing hearts and minds doesn't really accomplish the structural change in and of itself that is necessary. So what's the connection? Is there any way through conversation, through this sort of first step of connecting with people, that can lead more fully to the kind of structural change, real change that bears fruit? Or is that just, or do we have to wait for the other workshop to deal with that? Because that's not something that happens through conversation.
But it must come through conversation. And we need to challenge people about their beliefs and confront them about their racism. When they say there's no racism, let's talk about it. And you will find that there are various perceptions, not only politically, but psychologically, socially, and religiously. And so we are confronted with many issues, and communication has to be the avenue of dialogue and resolution. And it's hard, but at the same time, many of us grew up believing that we are all God's children. But then the perception is, are we truly all God's children because of our skin complexion, or perhaps our language, or our social background, and so forth. And the perception of me, sometimes I get upset when someone comes and say, oh, I know you had a difficult time. You've been under social pressure and come from a poor environment. And where did you get this thought of me? Because all of that is not me. And I've been blessed in a good environment and a good social mobility and a good economic foundation. And sometimes we have to challenge those thoughts, because there's a lot of misperception. The same with the Indians, Native Americans. What we see on television may not be truism, but it's a bias. The same we see about Asian Americans, and how we address them in many ways. And the same with my thinking of when Donald Trump threw toilet paper when he was in Puerto Rico to the people. I had problems with that. So, and it's a racial climate in our society. And we seeing many of that on January the 6th. And sometimes people are denying that. But racism is still alive, like sin. And let me not get theological.
Oh no, theology's okay here. So maybe time for one more answer, and then we'll turn to Susan. Anyone else on that point, Fern?
Oh, real quick, Brian, I agree with Chris and Reverend. The political part is was a strategy many years ago by the government. It's called divide and conquer, and we experienced that as Native American people, and we see that strategy being played out continually throughout history. So, Native people, we have dealt with the government, we have dealt with politics, we have dealt with religion, for the last 500 years. So, we are pretty bright people, we understand, we look at all this and, we can come to our conclusions and our by the experience is like, oh yes, divide and conquer. That's another one of those, and we see that all the time, being played out, and it gets people. It gets people to continue to be racist.
All right. Let me conclude our time with our panelists as we turn to the teaching portion by saying a huge word of thanks to Reverend Laura Heifetz, to I'm scrolling back up to get all of your titles correct. Reverend Chris de la Cruz, Elder Fern Cloud, and Reverend Dr. Michael Edwards. I am so grateful to all of you for being part of this panel today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And now let me turn to Susan Young Thornton, who is the spiritual formation specialist with Los Ranchos Presbytery, longtime Christian educator and leader in APSI. And she's going to lead us in a little time of conversation about something a lot of you have been mentioning or asking about in the chat box, which is resources connected to having these conversations. Susan?
Thank you, Brian. And we want to thank you for agreeing to moderate these panels. It is a great gift to APSI and to me personally for you to do this. When the Diversity Task Force began planning these workshops, we knew that the wealth would be in our panelists and that we would have a little bit of time to share some resources with you. And so I am going to share my screen and go quickly through some that we have available to you. And to also let you know that for every workshop, no matter which one it is, there are resources and handouts that you will find on the APSI website. And so you will be able to go back into a more complete stash of these sorts of, excuse me, I am tongue-tied this morning. You will be able to go back to find a better and more complete set of handouts. So we are going to talk very briefly about some resources to aid you in difficult conversations. Many of these resources are resources that you will be familiar with. The first one I am going to share with you is from Eric Law. He is an Episcopal priest, and he has written a book years and years and years ago called The Wolf Shall Lie Down with the Lamb, in which he talks about respectful communications, and he has guidelines for those. So you take responsibility, you listen with empathy, you are sensitive, you ponder, you examine your assumptions and presumptions, that you keep confidentiality. And this is one I want to spend just a second on, because here he talks about the difference between confidentiality and secrets. And confidentiality is keeping what is said in a group, in that group. It is, but keeping us, and that preserves community. But when one keeps secrets for the sake of creating sort of an in-group and an out-group, that destroys community. And so you'll want to spend some time thinking about that one as you think about how you communicate and have conversations in a healthy way. And then you have to trust the ambiguity that is there, that not everybody is going to see things the way you do. Like I said, this is a very old resource, but it is being used more and more and more. Those of you who are PCUSA will notice that in the past couple of years, Montreat has adopted this respectful communication guidelines, and also the next one, also from Eric Law, which is, come on, it does not want to advance. Why won't it advance?
Susan, would you like me to run your slides? I have them ready to go. Oh,
Yes.
There you go. You got it.
There you go. Thank you, Brian. My computer is getting old, so sometimes I think it just decides it's going to disobey. The mutual invitation is from the same source, and many of you are familiar with this. It is simply a way of giving everybody a chance to speak, but also those who want to pass the opportunity to pass. And as the facilitator, you are not in charge of the conversation, except to make sure that you are monitoring, to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to speak, and also to honor those who do not want to speak. Brian, if you'll advance to the next one.
You're actually still sharing your screen, but I will go ahead and do that now. So,
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you.
All right, I've taken it over now. So
Oh, perfect.
there's your next
So I
screen.
was on, yes. This courageous space is the property of Crossroads Anti-Racism Training, and it was shared with a group that I was part of by Jessica Vasquez Torres, who is well known to one of our panelists. And in this, they're talking about making a community agreement before you start in on these difficult conversations. And so it's a lot of the same things that you will see from Eric Law, but it's about respect. It's about listening to understand. It's about also taking responsibility for what you say, and for also your feelings and your thoughts, and particularly your words. And you always remember that intent is not the same as impact. So to really think about what you say in a group like that, that you need to make room for diverse voices, again, embrace ambiguity, and to preserve the integrity of stories, that stories are experiences and feelings of a particular person, and that they may be confidential again. Like I said, a lot of this is really fleshed out in the handouts that you will find on the APSI website. Okay, Brian. Things that we should do. We need to be curious. We need to have empathy. Always enter one of these conversations with a strategy and set realistic expectations. In other words, if you know the group and you know that they have done tons of reading and lots of study, your expectations are going to be very different than they will be with a group who is just beginning, who is for the very first time picking up a book on anti-racism, etc. So those are important things to think, and then also know where the power lies. Understand that there might be a pastor or a leader in a group to whom other people defer, and that person may have very different opinions or squash questions. So figure that out, and it may include a conversation beforehand with the person who is organizing this conversation, so that you will have the opportunity to assess that before you even begin. Okay. And then what to avoid is to thinking that you are better or that you know more. You don't want to get into back and forth arguments. If that begins to happen, you don't want to go back and forth with a particular adversarial person more than twice. And if you need to, take a chance to stop, take a deep breath, breathe in, breathe out, stop for a few minutes for a time of journaling or reflection, or even make it the time when you say, we're going to take a 5-minute break so that you can walk outside or pet the dog or something like that, something to break the cycle of that. And if you need to, you can go back to that person afterwards, but that's an offline conversation. Also, you don't want to control or police. And also, projection is hard. So be sure that you're not projecting your stuff into somebody else's thinking. Okay, Brian. And then this is a resource that is available to all Presbyterians. It will be in the stash on our website, but it's also on the PCUSA website. It's a 4-page document called Seeking to Be Faithful Together, Guidelines for Presbyterians in Times of Agreement. And it really fleshes out the ideas that you give others a hearing, that you listen before answering, that it's okay to speak the truth in love, as our panelists were talking about earlier, and that you do try to maintain unity of the spirit in the bond of peace. And there is the website where you can get it, but like I said, it's also in the stash. Okay. And then for further study, is a rather short list of selected readings is available on the APSI website under the link to this workshop. And those books have been curated by the Diversity Task Force, and they include books. There are 2 categories, one on racism and the history of the church, and then also there is a section on racism and the culture in general. And also available are descriptions of all this wonderful new resource that APSI is providing to all of its members. It is a set of 8 webinars that come from Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training. And you can access those from the front page of the APSI website. You must have a membership, and each of these are 90 minutes long, and they will be available to you as a member for 2 full years. And you can look to announcements and other communications from APSI about working with these. As you begin to view them, we will host some conversations and some Zoom webinars about them, as we will also, we are considering, because there are 3 teachers who each of us have 8 to 10 minutes, about organizing a Zoom meeting so that we can flesh out what I have just run through so quickly with you. Brian, I think that's it, so you can stop sharing the screen. And we are exactly at 15 minutes after the hour. And so unless there's a super quick question, I'm going to turn it back to Brian. And again, thank all of you for being with us. And I did put my email address in the chat. So if you'd like to know more about APSI's Diversity Task Force, feel free to email me. I might not answer you till the weekend, but I will answer you.
She will indeed. She's excellent at answering. Susan, thank you so much. Thanks again to our panel, and thanks to all of you for being part of this workshop. I hope you found it productive. Reach out with your questions or comments to the information that Susan has shared, and we will make sure that we get answers to your questions. Thanks again, and hope we see more of you as the APSI event continues. Blessings. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.